I still remember the sound of the clock in my grandfather's study. It wasn't particularly loud, more like a gentle tick that faded into the background over time. But whenever I stayed at his house as a child, it became a sort of lullaby. Reliable, rhythmic, constant. That old wooden grandfather clock had been in the family for decades, passed down from his father, and his father before that. It stood in the corner of his study like a quiet guardian, tall, sturdy, a little worn with age. It always smelled faintly of old wood and pipe smoke, the way only old things can. And then one day, it stopped. Not just slowed or faltered, it stopped. The ticking that had always been there without fail simply vanished. The hands froze at 3:17 p.m. That was the exact time my grandfather passed away. My mother was the first to notice. We had all gathered in the house after the funeral. She walked into the study, carrying a tray of tea, and paused. "The clock's not ticking," she said. We all turned. It was strange to hear the room without that gentle rhythm. The stillness was unsettling, almost too quiet. "Maybe it's finally broken," I offered, but Mom shook her head. "It was working this morning. I heard it." We checked the mechanism. Nothing seemed wrong. The weights were fine. The pendulum looked normal, but it wouldn't start again. We tried winding it, rebalancing it, even calling a local clockmaker the following week. He inspected it thoroughly and finally said, "There's nothing wrong with the mechanism. It just doesn't want to run." We all laughed awkwardly at that, but no one really joked after that. Weeks passed. I moved into my grandfather's house temporarily to sort through his things. I thought it would be easy. He was a tidy man, never one to hoard. But his study was different. Inside the desk drawers were notebooks, meticulously kept journals from decades ago. They weren't dramatic or even emotional, just observations, thoughts. Lines like, "Clock ticked 3 times too slow today." Felt like time stretched during dinner. Clock disagreed. "She came again in the dream." Same words, same dress. That last line repeated multiple times throughout the years. "She came again in the dream." I remember asking him once when I was little, "Grandpa, who's she?" He had smiled. "A visitor from somewhere else. She speaks in bells and always walks backward. But don't worry, she's not scary." I had thought it was one of his bedtime stories. But now, flipping through page after page, I wasn't so sure. It was almost a month after his death when the clock started ticking again. It was early morning, the kind of gray-blue light that only happens before sunrise. I had fallen asleep in the armchair in his study, surrounded by papers and the half-finished task of cleaning out his bookshelf. I awoke not to sound, but to movement. The pendulum was swaying gently, and that sound, that soft, hypnotic tick-tick, had returned. I stared at it, still half asleep, then glanced at my watch. 3:17 a.m. Exactly 12 hours from the moment it had stopped. Goosebumps crawled up my arms. I stood and approached the clock. It ticked steadily, its hands now moving again. Nothing had changed. No one had touched it. I hadn't wound it, repaired it, or restarted it. It had started itself. That day, I left the house and took a long walk. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if it wasn't just a coincidence? That night, I had a dream. I was sitting in my grandfather's study, but the air was thick with fog, and the bookshelves seemed taller, darker. In the center of the room, instead of the armchair, was a woman. She was turned away from me, facing the grandfather clock. She wore a long, flowing dress, vintage, maybe 1940s. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun. She stood completely still. Then she walked backward toward me, one slow step at a time. And I heard it, the sound of bells, faint and distant, like wind chimes in another room. When she turned around, her face was kind, familiar somehow. She didn't speak, just placed a hand on the clock, smiled and nodded. I woke up with a start. The next day, I searched the journals for any clues. In one of the older entries, dated 1959, I found this line, "Dream again. She touched the clock this time. Said, it will start when you're ready to leave." I don't know what that means. Was it possible that my grandfather had known? Had the clock stopped not just because he died, but because something else had paused? Time, memory, spirit? I told my mother about the dream. Her eyes went wide. "That same woman, he used to describe her to me when I was little," she whispered. "I thought it was just his imagination." I left the house a few weeks later. I moved back into my apartment in the city. The clock still ticks, my mother tells me. Still steady, still at peace. We didn't try to explain it anymore. We stopped asking why. Sometimes things in life don't need to be explained. Sometimes they are gifts, silent, mysterious gifts that connect the living and the gone. I think, in some strange way, that the clock is more than wood and gears. I think it remembers, and maybe so do I. Midnight Whispers is a place for kindred souls. If you feel like you found where you belong, please like this video and subscribe to the channel.